Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. This is Thanksgiving weekend, but it's still Shabbos morning Torah study, and we're certainly delighted that you're here. Hope that you're enjoying a healthy and sweet and happy Thanksgiving weekend. I'm joined this morning by my dear friends, Rabbi Marc Gellman, back from a health crisis, and we're delighted you're better, Marc. Thank you. And Rabbi Sherre Hirsch. I hope that you're having a wonderful Thanksgiving. And this morning, special guest, a dear friend, Rabbi. I'll give you smicha, Jerry. Mr. Jerry Rabow is a member of our congregation and author of a wonderful book on the matriarch Leah, the lost matriarch. And we'll be asking Jerry to fill in some of the parts of the Torah's story that have to do with this matriarch who we meet this week in the Torah. So this week we are exploring, we're delving deeply into the character, um, of Jacob. Jacob, who is our namesake. We are Bnei Yisrael. Jacob, who is the third of the patriarchs, the one that we are most directly related to. When we meet him last week, he is half a man. He is the twin brother of Esau, born in a struggle, struggling with his brother at the very beginning. In fact, when he's at the end of his life, which we'll meet in a couple of weeks, he's going to be taken down to Egypt to meet Pharaoh, who is the rescuer of his son Joseph. And Pharaoh's going to ask him, how old are you, old man? And the old man's going to say, I've lived 135 miserable years, because everything in his life is a struggle. And the struggle that we meet today is a struggle not only with outside forces, but it's the struggle within. Joseph Campbell made us aware of the journey of the hero. Jacob, who is so self-contained, so self-possessed, so capable of manipulating and getting his way in the world, is now going to meet a world which doesn't yield to his manipulation. More than that, not only does it not yield to his manipulation, but it's going to crack him open. So the Torah portion begins with the phrase, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. He leaves home for the first time. For the first time in his life, he's not sleeping in his mother's tent. For the first time, he's not sleeping under his parents' protection. For the first time, he's vulnerable. For the first time, he realizes just how alone he is in the world. And he takes a rock, a stone, for a pillow. Now, when I was in Boy Scout camp, they taught us how to use a towel or a knapsack or a sweatshirt or a girlfriend as your pillow. But a man who takes a stone for a pillow means he leaves home with nothing. He is, as it were, naked to the world, exposed to the world, and has a dream and sees the ladder that connects heaven and earth and the angels that go up and down through the world, and hears God's voice offer him promise and protection. And he wakes up in the morning with these important words, Adonai, God is in this place, Vani lo yadati, and I didn't know it, which is going to be a theme of his whole life. Where is God in his life? He doesn't know it. He can't see it. He's so contained in his own struggle, his own manipulation. He doesn't see that he's part of a larger narrative, a larger context, that things are happening and that he's touching the world. And then he proceeds on to the homeland, to Mesopotamia, where he arrives on a moment when their shepherds are bringing their flocks in. There's a well with a large rock on it. He asks why the well has a rock on it, and they tell him that's the way that they protect the water from those who might steal the water. And comes along his cousin Rachel, and his cousin Rachel is leading her own flocks, and he looks at her and falls madly in love. The boy is stricken. The boy is just stricken, and the Torah says he rolls the rock off the mouth of the well, which is a beautiful metaphor for something wakes up inside of him. For the first time in his life, Jacob needs people, wants relationship, wants connection. For the first time in his life, he understands that his whole life isn't self-contained, but the boundaries of his life are bigger than he might begin to imagine. And the story then unfolds of his relationship with Rachel and his relationship with his family, with his father-in-law to be, his uncle Laban, Rebecca's brother, and his relationship with the other sister, with Leah. And that's where we begin today's story. Let's take a look at the scene. He enters the family tent, stricken now with his newfound love, his infatuation with his cousin Rachel. She, by the way, is his cousin on both sides. because she is related to him on both his mother and his father's side. She's his first cousin on the mother's side, and I think it's a third cousin once removed on the father's side. And for those of you who are fans of Sigmund Freud, she is his mother's brother's daughter. So the boy who grew up in his mother's tent, under his mother's protection, under his mother's tutelage, meets the cousin who looks an awful lot like mom, only young and, you'll excuse me, hot. And that becomes the infatuation of his life. I want a girl just like the girl who married dear old dad. And that's who he's in love with. And that begins the drama. Marc, talk to us about this moment.
Yeah, well, to me, that's a beautiful summary of what happens. But there's something underneath it, which is rotten. And we all know about how patriarchal tendencies are dominant in the Torah, because that's the way things were back then. And we understand that that's the way things worked, that men ruled and that the eldest son inherited and all these things. The Torah has a critique of that to some degree, but basically we all are aware of these ancient practices. There is, however, a sickness, a prejudice in the Torah that is just as alive today, maybe more so than the time in the Torah, but equally alive. And that doesn't even have a name. But I'll give it a name, I call it Beautyism, which is the prejudice on behalf of people who are beautiful. Now, this affects men and women, but mostly women. In a male-dominated society, it affects mostly women. And the rottenness of this, the spiritual corrosiveness of this, is that it teaches women that their main value is how they look. Some men have that view for the same reasons, but it's primarily a disease, a cultural disease of prejudice, like racism or homophobia, that is imposed upon women. And we see it in the Torah when Rachel and Leah are described in exactly the ways that we would not want someone described if they were our daughter, which is, first of all, for Leah, we see that Leah is Einei Leah Rakot. She's described as the sister with the weak eyes. In Yiddish, she would be a miskite. In fact, there's another example of how Judaism perpetuates beautyism, a miskite. And so that's Leah. But her sister Rachel, we have Rachel, Rachel Haita Yafat Toar v'Yafat Mareh. You got that, Eddie? Hello, you got the Rachel text?
Yeah, we have it up on the screen, Marc.
Yeah, okay, good. So Rachel is described as beautiful of appearance, beautiful of form. It meant she had a shapely body. Now this, for those of us who believe, as I do, that there is not just an ancient cultural value to reading the Torah, but that God is trying to communicate with us through the Torah, which I believe. These verses are devastatingly embarrassing to me because they perpetuate the idea. There was a wonderful study that proved this, although there's hundreds of studies that can prove it, that they had a supermodel teach a first grade class of kids, beautiful, beautiful woman teaching these little kids, and she didn't know how to teach. She was just a model. Then they took a master teacher who wasn't that attractive, but was a master teacher. She taught a class for these kids. And then they asked the kids, who was your favorite teacher? And they picked the beautiful one. You can see it in, people getting a taxi back in the days when there were taxis, getting preferential hiring in jobs. No, very few people talk about how rabbis look, men who are rabbis. Women who are rabbis, I can't tell you how it gets me crazy. Somewhere in the beginning of talking about them, they'll say, she's really cute, or, but I said, what does that matter? How does that even matter? So I'm very upset that the Torah unwittingly perpetuates this idea that beauty is somehow not just an attribute like being left handed, but rather some kind of virtue. And that's my rant for this Shabbos.
It's appreciated. Thank you. Jerry, the character of Rachel takes center stage here because she is the object of Jacob's infatuation. And Leah stands off to the side. She becomes in many ways like the other sibling in the way that Esau was and Ishmael was. And she becomes the object of manipulation. On the wedding night, the father switches the two girls, and Leah is put in place of Rachel. And he wakes up with her in the morning. And once again, she is silent. She is the object, not the subject of the narrative. But I know that that's not the way the rabbis read it. And there's got to be more to her because she ends up being the mother of most of us. So tell us about Rachel. Tell us about Leah and what makes her remarkable.
I think I was struck hearing the discussion of the Beautyism theme, because it's not just Rabbi Gellman who is very concerned and angry and embarrassed by that. I think that the rabbis who created Midrash, the interpretive literature, had exactly the same response. The first thing that they did is take the very word that was the basis of that comment by Rabbi Gellman and say, well, the word is actually not quite so handy. If you translate it as weak eyes, there's not a whole lot that you can do with it except to say it's a derogatory trait. But they said the word is capable of being interpreted in a more ambiguous way by calling rachot, the rachot enayim, the not weak eyes, but tender eyes. And we know that's truly ambiguous. If I tell you that I apologize for my tender eyes, but I've been doing a lot of reading and light bothers me, and I'm wearing dark glasses, nobody is saying, oh, I'm saying I'm ugly. I'm just saying I have eyes that are tender, easily hurt. But if I say, oh, yes, I can remember meeting my wife, and the first thing that struck me were her tender eyes, then you know I'm not, and use that voice, I'm not really talking about a defect. So the rabbis talk about that, and they give it a lot of space, a lot of lines. So that's the first thing. And the second is on the other side, and I wrote the book about Leah because I felt she didn't get enough attention in the Torah text itself, being, as you say, being the mother of us all in sort of shorthand. Well, it comes down to Rachel's beauty is not the answer for everything that she wants and everything that she wants to be. So there is, first of all, the issue of yes, Rachel was beautiful, but her first actual discussion with Jacob is to demand in frustration that she get children. She has been deprived of being a mother. And the rabbis say, oh, that's not the first time we've had that situation. that in the early midrash about Lamech, they talked about the process of a man having two wives. One was for procreation, and one was for sexual gratification, and that the husbands actually used birth control, that is a cup of roots, which I guess is the ingredient in what they used for birth control, to maintain the good-looking wife, to keep her figure and to keep his interest up. So Rachel complains about that in the rabbi's view, not the text. In the text, all we hear is her complaining about not having children. And that itself indicates that beauty is not the end all. If you insist on accepting that it's not fair to get out of this by redefining rachot, eyes, as tender, but say they really primary meaning is weak, then the answer in Rachel's situation is, well, okay, where did her beauty get her? Other things became much more important, children, and she and the co-wives end up bargaining and so forth for the opportunities to have children. So I think the rabbis exactly respond to what is disturbing Rabbi Gellman. And it's unfortunate that people are not really as comfortable going beyond the text of the Torah to give it the thought that the rabbis have traditionally done.
It's a wonderfully, beautifully complex story. So what we have here is this dynamic of people using each other, and Jacob, who is Jacob who is manipulating his father, manipulating the brother, ends up as the object of manipulation in the end, and Leah, Rachel end up sort of playing through this drama as well. Sherre, help us understand Uncle Laban.
Well,
Okay.
first I just have to say, Jerry, I
Yeah.
mean, just the part on birth control, that was just worth your weight in gold. I mean, thank you so much. And Marc, I can't even tell you the difference that I felt, especially as a new rabbi, especially as a woman, and the amount of comments of the objectification that I experienced myself. So thank you both. I do have to say, I'm fascinated that Laban, who is the father of Leah and Rachel, buys entirely into this beautification, objectification of his daughters. They're not people to him, they're assets. And he's using them as currency. And he's thinking the better purse is Rachel. She's the Saint Laurent, right? And the worst purse is the chintzy one over here, Leah. And I am the master of the universe that can manipulate how I'm going to use these commodities. And it's really interesting to me because I think it's indicative of his relationship with his daughters. And if you look at the previous story, which is Rebecca and her relationship with Isaac, it was mother and son. And now you look at this story, Laban to Leah and Rachel, and it's father to daughter. And you wonder if the rabbis are trying to tell us about how mothers and sons interact and how fathers and daughters interact. And if they're telling us, what are they saying? So Laban is saying, my daughters are just something to use, just a transactional object. And you see that carried on throughout history, where fathers will say, oh my God, I'm so grateful I got a son. He can take over the business. He can do this. Oh, I've got a daughter. I wonder who will marry her off. And it's only changing now. But you see in a lot of tribal cultures, people really struggling with these father daughters. And I want to ask all of you listening, what is this telling you about your own relationship with your father as a daughter? Or what is it telling you about your own relationship as a son to your mother? And what is similar and what is different?
That's a pretty frightening question.
Right? I
Sherre,
mean,
go ahead,
that's why,
please.
right? The Torah stirs up our own questions inside of us. And for me,
Right.
it's like, what does that tell me about my relationship with my father? I've been public in my first book that it was a challenging relationship. It begs that question for me. And I
Right.
can't imagine it doesn't for other people as well.
Right. Sherre, go ahead.
Yeah, it just occurs to me that Laban does not just act. He has a personality, a character. He is quite consistent. Laban is. Maybe he's the most consistent and unsurprising, once you meet him, character in this whole little family drama. He doesn't change. In part, that's because in the rabbinic commentary, the rabbis don't let him change. The same thing that they do with Esau. Once they have somebody marked down as playing the role of the villain in the story, they hate to admit that he can come out of character or have a more complex character. But Laban is consistent. When Jacob is brought home, one of the first conversations is when Laban says, "Look, it's not right for you to work like this without getting paid. We should have some arrangement if you're going to take care of my flocks." The rabbis picked up that. Why was he saying it then? It sort of suggests that he greeted this relative, this nephew, and he put him to work like on a test program, like on an audition. And it wasn't until a month had gone by that he decided, okay, he checks out. So if it's a perfect match, it turns out, if Leah is discounted and Rachel gets the plus marks on the basis of beauty, Jacob has to earn his relationship with his potential father-in-law, or what he thinks he's going to have a relationship with his potential father-in-law, by having utilitarian benefits for him, by being a moneymaker, by being a good, you talked about commodity, by being a good commodity.
And very transactional, Jerry. Laban is showing us the model that people are commodities, they're transactions, they are not something greater.
And he does it again, by the way, according to the text and the rabbis, he does it again when he has the wedding feast. And he seems to be saying to all the people of the place, all the people that he gathers, that they should be paying for it. And the rabbis have this whole story about how he manipulates them and gets them to actually bring the food. And it's so he is, as I say, not admirable, but he is, as a literary matter, very consistent. That's the world that he constructs, and all the way through.
Let me just push back on this rabbinic turn on Leah, which I think was a really cover your tuchus move. I don't think it was sincerely meant. And the reason is, it is impossible for cultures to ignore the appeal of physical beauty. Now, the Greek culture went way one way on it in idolizing physical beauty. Judaism idolized physical beauty, but not as much. But even the rabbis who supposedly corrected the beautyism of the Torah, not so fast. The truth is, the rabbis are the ones who created the bracha, which ends shekacha lo ba'olamo. Shekacha lo ba'olamo means, you are blessed, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who's made Brad Pitt, who's made someone this beautiful. I mean, that's what you say. So they have a bracha. When you see a beautiful person, you're supposed to acknowledge it. And I find that profoundly courageous. I don't find that diminutive or spiritually corrosive. What it's saying is, listen, if you're going to ignore the appeal of physical beauty, you're ignoring the beauty of the world. Why should the beauty of humans be any different than the beauty of watching antelope or the birds around here, which are so gorgeous? It's part of the natural world to admire beauty. And the point is to not make beauty an acquisition, a virtue, but rather just an attribute. It's just an attribute that God gives certain people. It's obvious that God made certain people beautiful, and we have to acknowledge that. But we don't have to turn that acknowledgement into prejudice.
But isn't, Marc, beauty also subjective? I mean, what was a beautiful figure 50 years ago is very different than what's a beautiful figure now.
Yes, that's right. When I did art history, I thought I might do that. And I had a whole thing. I thought I might be the greatest Jewish expert on Rubens. It turns out that Rubens admired physical beauty, but it was pulchritudinous. It was
Hakazaftik.
Zaftic beauty. That's
Hakazaftik.
And by the way, you're completely right, Sherre. The standards of beauty that, let's say, Hugh Hefner introduced to a generation of boomers like me, the truth of the matter is that our notions of beauty would be looked at by my grandmother and were looked at, oh, these women are skinny. They're skinny. They got no meat on their bones. The Jewish notion was a much more hefty sense of beauty. So you're right. There are cultural variations of what is beauty, but it is still true that in every culture, there is a standard of beauty. Whether that culture differs from others, there's a standard of beauty. And
Sherre, what does the rabbinic tradition find in Leah that isn't obvious from the biblical text? What virtues do they find in Leah?
Well, I find actually it is in the text. I think the key to her character is the way she reveals herself through the names of her children. She gives them names that are like, indeed, are like captions or chapter heads for the parts of her life that are important. And so in answer to Rabbi Sherre's point that that Laban has this character of manipulating and commodifying people around him, she does just the opposite. She is somebody who is really looking for a sincere relationship, and it's almost like as her names progress, you can see that they're being for her first four children. Her names progress for those children, those sons, showing that she is battered by reality and has to accept less and less. And she starts out with love, and she ends up with commitment.
Jerry, you said something so beautiful just now. That assumes that when she went under the chuppah, knowing that she was duping her sister, that she was under the thumb of her father, and she had no power, no agency to change the situation. But when she became a mother, she had agency to rewrite her narrative, even with his controlling ways, even with his commodity way of dealing with her. And that's such a beautiful notion of what parenthood or motherhood can do for a person, even in the most extreme situations.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is the Bible defines women in terms of fertility. So the first kid is Reuven, which says he'll see me now. which means Einayim Rakot. The other way to look at it is that while Rachel attracted attention, as Marc said, because she was beautiful, Leah was invisible. Leah was the invisible one. But once she has a kid, which is the big Metzia in this family, from Sarah to Rebecca and now this one. Once she has a kid, he'll see me and he'll see that, how much I love him. And then the second one is Shimon. He'll hear me and he'll hear my voice. And then the third one is Levi, which means he'll come and accompany me. Now, remember, Sarah had one kid and Rebecca had two kids. So once Leah has three, she's now matched the family total. When she has the fourth one, Yehuda, which means she's beat the family total, Yehuda's name has nothing to do with Jacob anymore. It's I give thanks to God. I give thanks to God. That's all I want. Now you feel her coming into herself with the fourth kid. I have a whole mishpacha. Now I don't need him anymore. I've done it.
Eddie,
Yes.
what we always assumed that Leah, in the naming of her first three children, was to get Jacob's attention.
Yes.
What if it said something about trying to get Laban's attention?
Could be, or God's attention.
Or God's attention, right?
Right.
We always just assumed it was Jacob that she was seeking, that he would see me. But maybe she was saying, Laban, Dad, please see me, right? It could be.
The world see me. I'm somebody.
It could be much bigger than just Jacob's approval. It could be, who do I want to be in the world?
See, this is also a reinforcement of Marc's point. Beautiful people have a presence in the world. They are seen. People who don't define themselves that way. They don't define themselves by their physical beauty. Often we call them wallflowers in high school. Remember, you shrink into the wallpaper. You are not visible. You don't allow yourself to be visible. And pretty soon you internalize that and you don't allow yourself to be anybody. And what happens is that Leah emerges as a somebody in the course of the story. And what's wonderful, I think, Jerry, and you point this out in the book, is that at a certain point, Jacob, I don't know how you say this, Jacob loves her. He doesn't fall in love with her the way he fell in love, infatuated with Rachel. But he comes to love her in a way, because when Rachel comes to Jacob and says, now be with me, you get the sense that he doesn't like she's nudgy, she's irritating to him. He loves her, he loves Rachel, he loves Leah's steadiness, her strength, her maturity, the sense in which she's come into herself. I said this once in a class and I got into a lot of trouble. So I'll say it again so I get into more trouble, which is that, in matrimonial politics, you go to bed with Rachel and you wake up with Leah. A relationship begins with passion, with romance. And if it's successful, over time, we build a different kind of love, a love that is steady, a love that is trusted, a love that is powerful. In some ways, it's a bond even more powerful than the unsteadiness of infatuation. It's Goldie and Tevye at the end of the play. Do you love me? And she says, after 25 years of struggling and working and raising kids and suffering, of course I love you. And he says, yeah, it doesn't change a thing. It's nice to know. But he knew it already. That's why he asked the question. The infatuation gives way to a different kind of bonding. Marc, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a way out of this. And what I believe is, as I've said often week after week, which is when the Torah presents us with a problem like the binding of Isaac and God's command to kill an innocent boy, which is, let's just say, a problem, the Torah also provides us with a solution that you have to dig a little deeper to find. Well, I have that solution in this week's Parsha. You don't need the rabbis to try to dray the word rakot to mean something it doesn't mean and never meant, because they're embarrassed about it. And then that makes no sense about why they describe Rachel as beautiful and Leah as tender eyes. That's no contrast. This is the solution. And that is, when Jacob comes to the well and Rachel comes there and she's tending the flocks, there's three words that are never used about women, and they're used about Rachel, the beautiful one. Rachel was tending the flocks of Laban. Ki ra'ahi ki ra'ahi, because she was a shepherd. Now, there's no women shepherds. There were no women shepherds. That was a guy's job. But she was a shepherd because she was good at it. And because it has nothing to do with beauty. It has to do with skill. It's a virtue. It's an acquisition. And so the Torah is saying, listen, you're going to be living in societies which idolize beautiful women, however that is defined in the society in which you live, and beautiful men as well. They'll be called movie stars. They'll be called this or that or this or that. But basically, get over it. Get over it. I'm not teaching a Torah so that you can instantiate the worst of prejudice on behalf of beautiful people. What I want you to do is I want you to give women jobs they never had. And that was, Rachel is a shepherd. And it just is 3 words. And it doesn't say, and how wonderful that was, and how unique that was, and how extraordinary that was that a woman could take a man's job without any comment whatsoever. This was fulfilled in my own life when I was teaching a class, as I did every week with the little kids in the school. As soon as they could understand anything, they had an Ask the Rabbi session every week with Rabbi Gellman, if we could arrange it. And a bunch of little kids who are in a synagogue with a female assistant rabbi, a female cantor, and a female assistant to the rabbi. So there were 3 clergy in addition to me, all women. And the little girl stands up and says, Rabbi Gellman, can a man really become a rabbi? And that, to me, that was the greatest accomplishment of my life at Temple Beth Torah, that I raised up children who would ask a question, can a man become a rabbi? So I think that ki ra'ahi is the solution to beautyism. And it's buried in the Torah, waiting for generations, for thousands of years, for some rabbi, I don't know who, I don't know where, to just go and pluck it out of the Torah and hold it in his hands and say, see, God is not in favor of beautyism. Can I have an amen, hallelujah?
Amen.
Amen, hallelujah.
I have a different solution if we have another minute, Eddie. When I was early in the rabbinate, a couple came to see me. And as we know, there's always this couple sort of look like each other. They're in their same league. And they walked in and he took my breath away. He looked like Brad Pitt. And she, by objective standards, she was zaftig. She wasn't particularly pretty. And I, in all my judgment and all the things I don't like about myself, the first thing I thought is like, what's going on here? And I started talking to them, and he was already in love with her. And then I fell in love with her. She was extraordinary. She was beautiful. She was in every single way. Like, I just couldn't get enough of her. And afterwards, he paused and he says, now you understand, without me having said a word. And I said, not only do I understand, I wish every single one of us could see the world the way that you see the world, because then we would understand how to really love and adore one another. And I think about that all the time, because that's the kind of beauty we want to see in people. And he could live it, as could she. And they were madly in love, and they're happily married with a ton of kids, and they're adorable.
Amen. Hallelujah.
That's a lovely story. Thank you.
Yeah, good story.
That's a lovely story. Jerry, go ahead, please.
Yes, just a quick comment, because we're getting, I suppose, towards the end. But we just came from an earlier section of Torah. And I don't know how other people read Jacob and Esau, but because they're presented as twins, you think of sort of one human being kind of split in 2. That's not quite biologically what happens, but it's sort of suggestive. And so you think, yeah, there's some Jacob in Esau, and there's some Esau in Jacob. And that's, of course, intensified by the confusion real or feigned, of Father Isaac when it comes to the blessing issue. And I think maybe the same literary approach can be applied to these two women. These aren't two women. They're not even just two sisters. They are women or woman, and they are aspects of what a woman has as opportunities to be, or is given as traits, or and how she, any woman, indeed it applies to men too, how they become different because of different experiences and because of natural aging and because of the society that they're in. So rather than set up this "who do you like better" kind of beauty contest, maybe it profits us to read these two sisters as if they were, and indeed some of the midrashim toy with the idea that they were twins also. I mean, if Jacob and Esau can be differentiated by older and younger, even though they were twins, then maybe that's all that's being said about these sisters. And that would emphasize the fact that they are expressing the character traits. And frankly, before we live out our respective lives, we, each of us, can look back and see, wait, there was a little too much Esau and not enough Jacob in me, or vice versa. And I think the same thing can be said about these sisters who, at a different level, can indicate these are the potential pathways that you may not choose, but which you find yourself on in the journey of life.
That's wonderful. I think it's interesting, by the way, that we've now spent almost the entire session and not talked about Jacob and talked about sisters and Laban. So let me take a moment and finish with Jacob. To me, the Torah portion this week is about the cracking open of an egotistical self. I mean, we're all born individuals, and we're born sort of protected by our own sense of who we are and protecting the self. Um, Infantile egotism, they call it. And somehow, over the course of a lifetime, that cracks open. And we discover that life is also about the reaching out and the relationships that we build with others. In Jacob's case, it's a series of experiences that crack open the self. The experience of being all by himself in the desert, sleeping on a stone, and having a vision of a god of his ancestors. The experience, the vulnerability of that experience, the experience of finding the family, and his infatuation, falling in love with Rachel, and then marrying the two women, and the struggle of the family, the struggle for fertility in the family, the experience of being manipulated by Laban, the failure of his own wits, as it were, the realizing that he can't manipulate and control everything in his life, and slowly Jacob comes into his own. And that, I think, is the other great drama that's being presented to us. How does the infantile self, the small, narrow, selfish person, open up and discover the capacity to love, the capacity to care, the capacity to give, the capacity to teach? And where are the blind spots, the failures in that process? I think that's the other wonderful sort of drama that's going on here. And it's a remarkable drama to watch. And you root for him. You hope that something's going to open up inside of him and make him a different man. And that's, we're going to have to wait till next week, because that moment's going to come, but it's not going to come till next week. We leave it somewhat indeterminate this week, with Jacob finishing his career in the 21 years he spends in Haran. And now on his way home, he has to go home again, but he has to go home and confront all that he left behind before. And that's going to be the denouement of his character, the opening up of this wonderful character. And as we started, we're going to finish. He didn't know that where God was. God was in this place and I didn't know it, he said. And that's what happens to him all the way along. And each time you wonder if he goes to sleep at night looking up at the stars the way he did that first night and said, I think God's in this place too. I think that's what we're meant to hold. It's also Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim. This is also our own story, the national story of the Jewish people moving into the world, and each of our own individual developments. So I want to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving weekend. Thank you for joining us. Sherre Rabow, our special guest this evening.
Hey, Sherre.
Thank you. Thank you
Morning,
very
rather,
much.
the
Wonderful
author of
trip.
Leah, the Lost Matriarch, Jewish Publication Society, and lovely to have you with us to study with us. Rabbi Sherre, Rabbi Marc, take good care. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Everyone, thank you for being with us. Havdalah tonight at 6 o'clock. As always, of course, tomorrow morning, Minyan at 8:30, Minyan all week at 7:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the evening. Two other announcements very quickly. Of course, my Lunch and Learn at 12:30. On Wednesday evening, we begin a new series. We're not calling it College of Jewish Studies this year because it's a little bit bigger than that. It's a series that I've put together with a dear friend, Rabbi Noah Kushner, who leads a community called The Kitchen in San Francisco. And we're talking about how Jewish life is awakening all over North America and in Israel and around the world, and the ways in which Jewish life is becoming new. The revolutions going on in Jewish life. We begin that series this Wednesday night. It'll be on Facebook, YouTube, on the VBS platform, all over the place. The Forward newspaper is co-sponsoring with us. And over the course of Wednesday nights to come between now and Passover, we're going to be interviewing some of the great innovators, creative souls, spiritual souls who are leading the beginning of this new awakened Judaism. And you're all welcome to join us on that wonderful journey of discovery, Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock. Please be with us. Thank you for being with us. Happy Thanksgiving. Please, please, please stay safe so we can enjoy many Shabbos mornings together. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.